So one of the last sessions, and now that you guys are in the mood for exit after the last session, we'll bring out the investment bank. I spent about 5 minutes talking about Chesapeake itself and what we do. We are a mid-market investment bank, completely focused on technology, services, and software. We've been around since 1987. When we started, we were advising some of the early IT startups run by Indian Americans based out of the US. And in fact, we invested in a company which was quite small at that stage because they paid our fees in stock. It was a company called Mastech, and then it turned into iGate. So at least my partners made a lot of money when iGate went public. Again, we have a team in New York. We have a team in Bangalore. One of our directors sits out of Chennai. We are completely focused on cross-border M&A and capital raises. We've done $3 billion worth of transactions. Some of the companies, these are some of our clients that we work for. Now, the difference between Chesapeake and other investment banks is we do a lot of work both on the buy side and sell side, which means we work for buyers and sellers. These are some of the buyers that we've worked for in the past. So that gives us sort of a unique perspective on what the buyer actually is looking for. And when we start advising sellers or people who are looking to raise capital, we bring that perspective in. And you've heard of this, some of this in the last presentation, but I'll touch on the valuation piece. So there's a lot of big names here on this slide, but I'll give some context and we can dig deeper into the next slide. There are 5 basic criteria on how a company is valued. It's sort of a regression model between these 5, and each company has its own coefficient. That's the way we kind of look at it. A lot of the times when we are, advising buyers, investment banks on the other side who are advising sellers will come to us and say, hey, TCS is valued at X, Y, Z, or 20 times EBITDA. Our company should all... No, TCS is a $30 billion company. There is a difference between valuing each kind of company, and I'll give examples here. So the reason TCS is valued at 20x and Zensar is valued at 14x, because Zensar is a $500 million company, TCS has close to $30 billion in revenue. Scale does matter. It matters when you are dealing with, in the mid-market space also, because as, IT professionals, when you are implementing a solution, if the solution is implemented at scale, that gives better confidence to the buyer or the investor that you actually can implement that solution. So don't think of scale in terms of just revenue. Scale can be in terms of client size, scale can be in terms of relationships, scale can be in terms of, the size of solutions that you are implementing. If some of you are in the data analytics space, implementing a small data solution for one project in one location is very different from, let's say, implementing something across the board for somebody like Amex. So that is something that companies look for. Scarcity. It's more differentiation than scarcity. Companies like, let's say, Palantir, they are doing a lot of work for the CIA which nobody even knows. So they are a scarce company. In your world, are you doing something differentiated? And there was a lot of companies that came up here that were doing differentiated product. So IT services in general is a very crowded market. And you have to learn how to differentiate yourself. And, investment bankers, financial advisors do have their own view and they can help you in terms of exit. But you have to position and differentiate yourselves away from the crowd. Intellectual capital, I put it here because more and more we are coming across companies, even in the services space, which have intellectual capital. Now we do some product deals as well. I'm not talking about that kind of intellectual capital. I'm talking about, let's say, internal IP and frameworks, kind of like a persistent kind of business. If you're doing product engineering or OPD, if you have productized solutions, even if it's not licensed, it doesn't have to be trademarked, it doesn't have to be licensed, but if you have a delivery process that is more efficient, then that will be valued. In fact, a lot of buyers are looking for IT services, consulting companies where the delivery process is sort of productized. So that actually has value. Human capital comprises of two things: senior management and what kind of people are the rank and file. If any of you have gone through diligence processes, they would ask you about skill sets of your programmers, skill sets of your sales personnel, skill sets of your second level management. So that's extremely important in the IT services industry because we are a people-driven industry. And taking a cue from the last presentation, growth potential. Most IT services transactions that we do, at least I've done in Chesapeake for the last 10 years, they have an earn-out component. So I'll talk about it a little bit, but there's a profitability metric, but there is a deferred payment. And what happened in 2020, as an example, is that a lot of companies were projecting based on the growth in cloud in 2020, which was hyperbolic. And a lot of them missed their earnouts in 2021 and 2022. They sold at really high valuations, which is what you see in Economic Times, by the way. The Economic Times doesn't tell you, 40% of the consideration is deferred based on X, Y, Z. So think about when you are presenting to a buyer, you have to have, projections and think about it conservatively. Because the last thing you want to do is get a great valuation and miss half of it because you missed the projections that you yourself have put out. So that's what essentially buyers are paying for. This slide gets into a little more of detail. I'll talk about it for a little bit, then I'll stop. And if you guys have any questions, this is specifically for tech consulting companies. And this is taken from, the previous slide. So market differentiation, do you have a differentiation in terms of vertical or horizontal expertise? Vertical is, do you have an industry focus, right? Because a lot of buyers in today's world have, especially buyers who do tuck-in acquisitions, your typical buyer profile would be companies with over $50 to $100 million in revenue. They have 2 or 3 verticals. They are either trying to bolster one of the verticals that they are in, or they are trying to create another vertical. So if you have a specialized sort of vertical focus, that is valued. Horizontal focus, there was a presentation by one of the ex-Microsoft folks. If you have horizontal expertise in, let's say, Dynamics or Salesforce or even data engineering, yes, that is a capability that is valued. So market differentiation is very important in terms of valuation considerations. And I was talking to a gentleman 15 minutes earlier. You only need one buyer. You can't sell to multiple buyers. So it doesn't matter if you get 15 LOIs or 1 LOI, right? Sometimes we've done deals where we've gone to 20 buyers, but only one has actually shown interest, but the company fit the buyers so perfectly that they gave a great valuation. So that is what I'm talking about in terms of market differentiation. Client engagements, this is slightly more applicable for, companies which are doing export revenue more than internal revenue. But even if you're doing revenue in India, do you have enterprise clients? Because if you're going to be an investor or a buyer, there's a diligence period of, let's say, 3 or 4 months, or even a banker, for example. I can't figure out what you are doing at an internal level in those 3 or 4 months. But if you are doing that for ICICI or HDFC or somebody at scale, I can be sure that ICICI has hired you for a reason. That gives me assurance that your sales team can get big clients, you can deliver to big clients, and therefore you have a solution that's worth digging into. So client engagements, the other thing about client engagements is the level of relationship you have, and that's one of the things that founders should be aware of, that most companies in the mid-market space, the main relationships will be at a founder level. And buyers and investors know that. So in a transaction structure, they would want the founder to stick around for at least 18 to 36 months after the transaction is closed. Now, in that period, the onus is on you to sort of transfer the relationship to the buyer or to your own second level management. So that's a pretty important consideration. And sometimes we've seen LOIs which lock in sort of key management personnel, that if these guys lose, you lose this much amount. So it's on the selling shareholders to ensure that their senior management that who have the key relationships stay. Because in a services transaction, we've had transactions where we were advising, I don't remember, maybe Zensar at that point of time, and they bought a company in the US. Toys R Us was a big customer. Toys R Us left after the founders left, and essentially that was all the revenue that was there in the. So it's a big loss for the buyer in terms of valuation. Management strength, probably one of the most important, because when you're having transaction discussions with buyers and investors, you are the first and probably only face they will meet till diligence. So all the impression that an investor will get is from you. And there's only so much that a advisor or a banker can do. So if you are not making a good first impression, that's half the game lost. So the importance of really thinking about how you want to present the company, practicing it with your advisor, with your senior management team is very, very important before going into transaction discussions. At later stages in transaction discussions, you'll have to expose your sales team or your second tier management team. Again, prep them. Because it's all, nowadays it's all on Zoom, it's not on meetings. Your buyer might not be here, they might be sitting in Europe, they might be sitting in the US. They're not going to come to your office and spend 3 days with you. You have a limited amount of time, maybe 1.5 hours. People will keep dropping in and out of the call. So make sure you practice, you make a good impression, because the comfort level of paying you a certain valuation and justifying it to the board is critical. So if as a banker or an advisor to buyers, or as a corporate development executive, or as an M&A head, or even as the CEO, I remember have to present to the board that I want to buy X company and this is the valuation I'm willing to pay for it. If I'm not getting that comfort, I will not make the business case for you. Delivery organization, now it depends what kind of delivery organization you guys are running. Typically staffing or BPO type businesses, which were the old sort of 90s businesses, are not too highly valued. Again, as I said, productized delivery, ability to deliver at scale is higher value. Front-end consulting, anything related to do with data, and if you throw out AI ML in Bangalore streets nowadays, you'll probably get a good valuation. So delivery organization is one of the key factors. Financial performance, obviously, this is something that, not a lot of entrepreneurs want to talk about eventually, but your final valuation is going to be based on a financial metric, which is going to be probably an X over EBITDA. EBITDA or profitability, some metric of profitability. If you are super profitable, it may turn out that it's 3 times revenue. If you're not, it may turn out to be 1 times revenue. So certain gross margins, EBITDA margins are critical. We've known buyers like Accenture who have actual thresholds of margins for companies that they would even consider. So anything below 15% for Accenture, they will not even look at anything else that we've presented. So buyers have certain criteria, especially listed buyers, because remember, if they acquire a company where the earnings per share is lower than their actual earnings per share, their stock is going to go down and not up. So especially if you're talking to listed companies, it's very important to figure out EBITDA margins. Now, what are EBITDA margins that we look at as advisors to sellers? It's normalized EBITDA margins, and that concept, is a little non-accounting, where you take out all the extraordinary expenses, one-time costs. So the buyer wants to see what is your normalized EBITDA. If you spent a lot of time or energy or cost during COVID, that's one time. It's not going to happen every year. So when you present financials, take that out. Footnote it, but take it out. Because in the end of the day, if Deloitte is doing diligence from the buyer's side, they are also trying to figure that out. So give them that data. Figure out what your normalized EBITDA margins are. Figure out what your normalized gross margins are. And obviously, if you have an advisor, great. They should be doing this for you. So maybe I'll stop here. It's a lot of data. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll move on. Yeah.
So a lot of us might not be having their own IPs. We might be into solution provision, problem solving for customers, which may include some products, some services, some system integration effort. So mix of these things.
Okay.
But they might be uniquely positioned. For example, my area of work is public key infrastructure. This is, in my opinion, a very differentiating line of business.
Correct.
Because there are a lot of scarcity in terms of resources, in terms of skill sets, in terms of understanding of the technology. So does it make sense?
That's exactly what I was trying to say. I'm not saying, so this slide is meant for consulting companies. Let's say you're doing system integration work and you have a great relationship with Microsoft, and Microsoft is your channel partner, and they are bringing in sales. That's very valuable because you don't have to hire salespeople because Microsoft is doing all your sales. You have an integrated knowledge of dynamics and how to implement.
High level of partnership with our OEMs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Biggest in the region, things like these, they do matter.
So when, I'll give you another point, when people are doing outside in diligence on your company, let's say you are a Microsoft partner, the partnership level, that matters. A lot of the time when we are advising buyers, buyers give us a list from the Gartner report that, go contact this company because they've appeared in a Gartner report. Or go contact, I only want my platinum Salesforce partners, right? So having some kind of relationship, especially when you're dealing with ISVs, how deep is that relationship? Where is that relationship? Is definitely differentiation.
So differentiating factor is important actually.
Yeah, yeah.
This
Look,
this helps in improving the number of times when you said for the EBITDA or whatever.
yeah, this 1 to 4 determine fit. If there is fit, then people go and say, okay, I want this company.
Now look at point number
Now
5.
let's look at 5 and figure out whether it's either too expensive for us or whether we can afford it.
Right.
Right? So whenever we have discussions, whether we are representing the seller or the buyer, the management discussions, the management never has financial discussions on a call. Management to management is purely 1 to 4. Then the bankers have the financial discussion on the side and the valuation discussion on the side. So 1 to 4 is what is evaluated first.
Right.
Otherwise, there is no term sheet. The term sheet is 0.5.
Correct. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, okay.
So generally, SaaS companies which has average recurring revenue,
Yeah.
would it have higher valuation compared to companies which are engaged in one-time revenue or a service-based organizations?
Depends on size, really. It's a loaded question. $20 million SaaS company will have more valuation than a $20 million services company. But that's purely because a SaaS company owns the IP. And if they are in the data space, they own the data also. When services companies typically deliver, it's white label solutions, right? So when Mu Sigma is working for Walmart, whatever they develop for Walmart is Walmart's IP. And the data is Walmart's as well. So that's how services and software companies or SaaS companies are different. So you have to compare like for like in that case. And there is a IP value as well, because there in software companies, the IP is trademarked and copyrighted, right? So there, companies with even a few $100,000 or even $1 million in revenues can be valued at $20-25 million because it fits greatly into the product portfolio of a bigger ISV. Why do software deals typically happen in the lower space? I'm not talking about, Google buying Fitbit, for example. And especially in the SME space, it's to buy IP, right? Now, Akamai, which is a big global company, maybe doesn't have a specific endpoint solution that they want, right? As a result, it will lose out to Radware, probably a $50 million deal to their customer because it doesn't have that and Radware has that, right? So it will go out in the market and search for any company that has that kind of IP regardless of revenue. So that's how SaaS companies and software companies are valued. And it's very different from services companies.
One more question related to it. Now, when you are talking about SaaS companies, there are two types of SaaS companies. Okay, one is independent SaaS, where they have developed their own IP and their own platform and itself. And then there are SaaS companies which are dependent on, say, for example, something made on Salesforce or something made on Dynamics platform. So
Okay?
when you are doing the valuation of both companies, okay, does it matter that this particular company since it is based only on Salesforce, their
Yeah.
solution can work only on Salesforce. So the valuation would be lower?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We come across companies all the time, let's say, who are on App Exchange or have built on force.com, software business of their own. Is it as valued at Salesforce itself? No. Will it get value? Yes, right? Because a lot of, let's say, NLP software companies are building out of Google's translator itself. Do they have to build their own ASR engine? Probably not, right? But if there is industry focused IP, let's say a company like Unifor, they cater to financial services. It's not like Unifor has built everything from scratch. They are using a lot of APIs from, maybe Google, maybe Salesforce, but they are a software company, and end of the day, they are selling as a SaaS business. Right. Yeah, that's definitely a SaaS company. But you have to account for that license fees that you are paying to Salesforce every time you sell at the end. You'll have to account for that in terms of valuation.
Just last question related to that. Is it like buyers are looking for any particular size of the companies in terms of, say for example, if I'm a Salesforce partner or Dynamics partner and I build certain IPs on top of Dynamics platform,
Yeah.
which where I sell globally.
Yeah.
Okay, and it is since Dynamics is SaaS, my offering is also SaaS.
Right.
So is there a minimum threshold of, the revenue
In the
which
SaaS
companies look for?
space, no, we've typically not seen. Look, in the end of the day, even most software companies that are being valued as unicorns have less than $10 million in revenue, right? So it's really, is your buyer looking for that piece of IP that you have built? And how much time is it going to take, and how much cost, opportunity cost also, they are going to incur to build the same IP that you've already have, right? Maybe they'll take 3 years to build it. By that time, they've lost out on a bunch of deals. So that's how things will be valued. I'm sorry, there was a second part of your question also.
I was asking, there is a bare minimum value you answered.
Bare minimum value for software companies, no. It's in the mid-market space, it's mostly IP. Yeah, big Silicon Valley deals, it's in, billions, and, the companies are also hundreds of millions. Typically in the services space, just taking from that question, yes, there is one, because if you are looking to get market value, you have to be over $7-8 million in top line. Otherwise, unfortunately, there are no buyers for the business, because most IT companies, because it's been around since the early 80s, are at least $100 million in revenue. And they are executing projects which are large, right? They don't want to look at anything under 7-8 million, because that becomes too subscale for them. Okay, I'll move on. How much time do I have? This is something that we've done for our clients in the past. This is just an example of the previous slide. So the company that we were representing was doing two things, UX and Salesforce. We spent about 3 months with them, talking to their founders, talking to the senior management, talking to the tier 2 level management, looking at the financials, looking at the market, looking at how they sell. And we come up with a scorecard and then figure out with the founder that is he, because all founders always have a end value, which may or may not make sense in terms of once you make it into ones and zeros or make it into a multiple. So then we figure out, is this the right time to sell? Can you get to a point where you get that value? For example, there was a company that told us, when we were talking to them, they were doing about $6-7 million in revenue. The founder said, we are 4 guys, we need $50 million to make any kind of return on our efforts, because that $50 million is going to be divided into 4 chunks. They were equal founders. So at $6-7 million, we said, then wait. We'll work with you. We did some consulting work for them. Eventually, they reached about a $45 million valuation, right? 2-3 years later. So sometimes it happens that either the market is not right or the company is too small. There we just say that at least Chesapeake will not be able to represent you fully. So this is the kind of work that typically happens, and there are a lot of advisors who do similar kind of work, but this is kind of a scorecard that will give you an idea of how to value your business. The other thing that I would mention, that I know every founder, I have investments in companies as well, every founder thinks that their company is the best company. When you are thinking about an exit, take your founder hat off and put your investor hat on. If you were the investor in your own company, how would you look at it 3 years down the line? Is it exitable? Because if you go talk to an investor, they will not tell you, but the only thing that they are thinking about is, if I invest in this company, can I exit it? Because they only make returns once they exit the company, right? So if you are thinking of an exit, think about yourself as the investor in your own company and not the founder. Because then you'll start seeing a lot of, this is inefficient. Yesterday we had a call with a company in the US. They were paying $6,000 per month in bank fees in the US. And we pointed that out. The CFO never looked at it because it was too small in his P&L. But those are the kind of things you'll start to figure out once you start cleaning up your balance sheet, once you start looking at your P&L a little more critically, and once you start building a projection. Because if you go into M&A discussions without a projection, especially for consulting firms and IT services firms, it goes nowhere. Because the buyer is going to come back and tell you, okay, tell me what revenue you are going to hit, what what EBITDA you are going to hit. Based on it, I'm going to structure the earnout. So just that's something to think about. These are the areas that we generally work upon. This slide basically, in the current market where companies in the circle are being priced and how scalable are these companies. Strategic consulting, for example, would be something like a smaller McKinsey. It's highly priced, it's very high end, but the projects will only be 1 or 2 months. Those companies tend to be pretty small. It doesn't tend to be scalable businesses, right? And to your bottom right are basically a catch-all digital platform engineering, or what it used to be called product engineering 20 years back. That's a catch-all for companies that deliver end-to-end solutions. So this is where we are seeing kind of margins and scalability in terms of businesses. These are some numbers. It may not be relevant to some of your businesses because what we track is generally deals with over $25 million in enterprise value, which are public and announced. So these are some of the multiples that we are seeing. In general, right now, IT multiples can be anywhere between 8 to 12 times EBITDA. IT consulting, staffing and BPO are lower. And if you have IP, it can go higher and higher and higher. So that's the trend that we are seeing in the market currently. And it has picked up over the last month or so. Before that, a year before that, it was completely flat after US started raising interest rates. This is my last slide. This is probably the most important thing that will determine your valuation. Typically, when we are working with founder-owned companies, even if you think your financials are great, when you go into a transaction discussion and when you're talking to the PwCs and Deloittes of the world, the financials that they want to see are very, very clean. So from a from a diligence perspective, from the time you start actually talking to a buyer who's interested till closing a deal, which is equal to money in the bank, if it goes more than 4 months, two things happen. Market changes and your business changes. We've seen client losses as well during that period when transaction discussions are going on for 12 months and the buyer loses interest because the corporate development or M&A head is looking at 5 different deals at his end and talking to 5 different companies. If you are taking too much time giving him data during the diligence process, he's going to close the other deal and that opportunity is gone. Maybe he's looking at 5 dynamics companies at one shot, right? So it is very, very important before you go into any transaction discussion to have your ducks in order. Especially for Indian companies, it has happened in every Indian deal that we've done. There is something wrong with the shareholding. Either the share is not stamped correctly, or there is some tax that is not paid. So make sure before you go into a transaction discussion, there are mid-market lawyers available across Bangalore. Make sure you get a diligence done. Because you don't want to end up with a great deal on the table, but you can't transact because your shares are not transactable. Or there's some lien on it that you forgot. So, and we come across, and India has thousands and thousands of laws. I'm not saying you have to be compliant with every one of them, but these are critical. And if you are exporting, FEMA is absolutely critical. Most large buyers will not even tolerate 1% of FEMA violation. They don't want to get into that mess, or a tax violation or a GST violation. So have someone check your legal and tax before you go into finance discussions. We've actually advised clients where we've stopped the deal process, spent 1 year cleaning up legal, tax, and financial, then gone into the deal process. Because let's say you have some RBI issue with your shares. It takes 6 months for the RBI to get back. The buyer has already hired Deloitte, Nishit Desai, bunch of other consultants, paying them $1 million a month. They're not going to wait for another 6 months for the RBI to come back. So a lot of the transactions, if they go smoothly, when you are negotiating, you have the upper edge. If they are not going smoothly, then the buyer is the king. Otherwise, you can negotiate on your own terms if you are giving them data on time, if your presentations are good, if your company is clean, they don't find anything, then you get the price you want. Buyers use these kind of little things to lower the price even after they've given you a term sheet. Just so you, for those who don't know, I'm sure a lot of you know, a term sheet is not a binding document. The buyer is not obligated to pay you anything. The moment you sign a term sheet, there is a separate share purchase agreement or a share subscription agreement that is the binding document. Between those two documents is a thorough diligence period, which for companies below, let's say 100 crores in size, should not take more than 2-3 months. If it's taking more than 2-3 months, it's getting cost inefficient. So if everything goes well, you can get the price you want. But if they find these little things, then you're going to start getting calls from the buyer's advisor that yaar, ye nahi hai, wo nahi hai, phone nahi hai, tax is not paid. Okay, so we are going to lower the valuation from our LOI by 25% because we'll have to come and clean your company up. So don't be in that situation. I mentioned this before. Typically, in the consulting world, what we see is about 60 to 70% upfront is paid at closing, which means, once you sign the SPA, about 30 to 40% is an earnout. It'll either be a revenue earnout or an EBITDA earnout where the targets are set, or a combination of both. And it's pretty standard across the IT services industry. One of the things that is important to note in the transaction structure, let's say you are not getting the valuation you want. The buyer will eventually give you that valuation if you agree on a larger earnout. So you have to figure out if you're confident in your projections. Don't leave money on the table because you want everything upfront. So there is some flexibility from most buyers on price based on how you structure the upfront versus earnout. And sometimes it happens that, let's say the seller knows that he's going to probably double in the next 2 years, but he wants some cash right now because he spent 20 years building the business. Sell 60% and have a second bite at the apple 2 years down the line at the valuation of the bigger business. So there are ways to structure these kind of transactions. It's all negotiated between the buyer and the seller, but when you are going into negotiations, do keep a sort of minimum threshold, especially when you're negotiating the LOI, because you don't want to go into diligence and open up your books because if you are not really happy with the price. So keep a minimum, assume that some things will be found, even if they lower the valuation by 10% or 15%, yeah, I'll sell in the end of the day. Because some things will be found and in the SPA stage, they will come back and renegotiate the price. So keep that in mind. I think this was the last slide. I'll take questions. Okay. All right, thanks. Yeah, I think he has it, so. Sure. Yeah, we can share.